just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tankley, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
Today, we thought we would talk about adult learning communities, and specifically because last week I had an experience that was interesting and trying to kind of find that magic again. And we'll talk about that. But I wanted to go back in time first into the adult learning communities we've been a part of. And I know we've touched on this in other episodes, but I think it's worth kind of pulling apart what makes those adult learning communities so special, because I've been chasing it ever since. And
Same.
I know that, I was going to say, I know that that's been true for you too. So I thought we might start with the place that we really found that community early on and what that looked like.
Well, we started, actually, that's how we met too, right?
It is, yeah.
How in the early 2000s, there was a lot happening on the internet. Blogging was a thing. And I remember I started in 2005. But then when Twitter came around, because before that we just had Facebook, and that didn't feel like, that just felt more like, catching up with high school friends. And
do you know
family.
That I had Twitter before I had Facebook?
That doesn't surprise me, because for a lot of people, it was mostly just college kids, right? And I
don't know, but I was not there until after.
Facebook started, you had to have a university or college email to get an account. So my oldest daughter was doing that. And then I was in graduate school at the same time. So I was starting to, I'm like, oh, I'll pop in and see what this is all about. But it wasn't where you could form a community at first.
Sure.
So as Twitter came out, that was like 2007.
Yep.
That's when, again, it was mostly celebrities, the knitting community, and then a bunch of educators. And it was funny how we even just found each other, because you didn't see a timeline unless you were following people.
Is that true? It must have been through retweets and things.
Yes. So Once you started following, so I knew other educators in the area, and there were some bloggers that I had started following.
That's how I found people, I think. Yeah, it was through the bloggers. I originally got on Twitter because my husband got on Twitter, and I knew he was tweeting. And so I was like, well, that'd be an interesting peek into like what he's doing during the day. So I originally got on just to see like what's going on with him at work and whatever else. And then I realized through blogs that, people would put their Twitter handles, and I was like, oh, there's other educators here. So I started following Jen Wagner and David Warlick, I think were the first two educators I followed. And it was probably through their retweets or sharing that I discovered others.
Yeah, I think for me, Tony Vincent, he and I worked in the same school district at first. And then, and he was really big on blogging, and he had done that with kids, and a lot of different uses of technology and what we used to call Web 2.0. The first version basically of the internet was just consuming it, right? It was just people put up web pages, and that's where you would read things. But then Web 2.0 was really more about interactive use of the websites that were out there, but that also social media really became that piece. And now all of a sudden we were able to start connecting with people. There were quite a few Canadians that I was following, and they talked about being the lone evangelist in their district or their division.
There was a lot of that.
Yeah. It was great to be able to connect and find learning communities where we could talk about things that maybe weren't necessarily happening in our buildings or our own districts, but that we were interested in, and we were curious about, how can I learn more about this?
Well, and what was cool, and I think you experienced this too, because teaching can be isolating anyway. It can feel kind of isolating that you don't necessarily have time that you're spending it with your coworkers throughout the day the way other professions do. But I think specifically for me in my school, and I think this might have been true for you, when you're a specialist, your community kind of shrinks in school because you tend to have kids when nobody else has kids. That's why, they're with you while they have breaks. And you don't have those teams like, the third grade team or the second grade team or whatever. I didn't have a team that was doing the same things I was doing or that I could bounce ideas off of. And so I would get together with a specialist team, but those were a wide variety of people. And they would all say like, yeah, I'm not really super techie and I don't necessarily care about that. So I would come like wanting to share ideas or I just found this new cool thing. But there's kind of nobody in the building that did that with me. So to find people online who are interested in the same things and geeking out about the same things and giving me a window into other places, like you're saying, that weren't necessarily what was happening in my school was really interesting.
Yeah. Even before I went back to the classroom as a music teacher and I was still in technology staff development, I was going to education conferences like ISTE, but it was called NEC then. And I think honestly, that is probably how I met more people before Twitter became a thing.
Yes.
So I had met them in person. That's how I had met Scott McLeod and Darren Draper. Yeah. And they had a bloggers cafe at the NEC/ISTE conferences before Twitter was even a thing. So my friend Dan Schmidt, he works for Apple, but he was also still in Nebraska. He and I went to the same university. We'd been music teachers at the same time and then both left to go to tech fields. And he actually is the one who got me connected to Twitter. And we kept talking about how it was like this convergence of people were going to ed conferences.
Yep.
People were specializing in ed tech conferences.
Yep.
Blogging was a thing and Twitter was brand new. So we had social media that was tying all of these different tools together. And that was really how we found that
neat,
community.
Like network overlap of things like all woven together in the right moment.
Right.
Because the conferences then were not as overwhelming as I feel like they are now. In other words, you could hit a bunch of sessions, you could hang out in the bloggers cafe, you could meet people. When I go to the bigger conferences now, if I don't already know people, it feels harder. And that might just be who I am, but it feels harder than it used to just like, find a group of people that you jived with.
I would say that's true. When I first started going to the conferences, I often was by myself. I was the only person that was sent. And then if I knew other people from Nebraska going with, I would kind of hang out with them. So there was like a small contingency. We, a lot of us had the same block in the hotels. And the nice thing too is that each state kind of has their own ed tech association. And a lot of times they would be the ones who kind of organized their own meet and greets. Yes. So again, for somebody like me, I might seem extroverted to some people, but I'm really not. And it was hard to get to know and meet people. I'm not the type of person just to walk up and, hi, I'm Michelle.
Yeah.
We can fake that. But I think those really large conferences made that very difficult for people.
Yeah, I would agree. It certainly was for me. But the more I got to know people online through their blogs, through Twitter, Amy Berval was doing her history for music teachers. And I remember using her work at my school and then seeing her at one of the conferences and being like, I know her, because we had talked on Twitter, we had done these things. So it started to make these bigger spaces feel more intimate than maybe they really were. And that might have just been an outcome of being in those online spaces where you started to chat with people and get to know people and see their work and be exposed to the things that they were doing before you met them in person. So you felt like you already had this mini relationship. And then when you saw them in person, then that could expand, which was always fun. But yeah, I think the alchemy of the things that were happening all happened at kind of the right moment.
I agree. If I were starting all over today, I think it would be a lot harder because people are in a lot of different places, where back then it was all really new and
it was pretty concentrated in a couple places.
Yeah. And you would congregate in, like, if you were somebody that was new to Twitter and you said, hey, I'm, following you and I'm an educator, a lot of us would like retweet this person and say, oh, hey, this new to Twitter, hey, join along. And we would talk about Ed Chat. Yeah. I know that's something that you and I participated in quite a bit.
It felt so much more accepting for people who were newcomers to come in, and everyone to share, to retweet, like you're saying, and introduce. And here's, a list of people would make a list of other educators to follow, and they would share those out and introduce, which I have not seen that in more recent years. It kind of is assumed you'll just find your people, I think.
So Blue Sky has hashtags also. So it's very similar to how, to me anyway, to how Twitter started. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of educators who will do the Follow Friday, but then they will also create starter packs. So if you if you're an educator looking for a specific niche, you can go follow one of those people, but some of them already have starter packs to say, hey, here are some other people that you might want to follow as well. And you can click on one button and now you're following that whole group. So that's kind of cool too.
That is cool. Yeah. So Ed Chats I loved because it was a hashtag that was started, and it was a time every single week, couple times every single week, where educators were saying, we're all going to get together. We're going to have a topic. They even let you vote on what the topic would be before Twitter had voting even. And so we would go in and you'd vote on the topic, and then that topic would be the one, kicked off, and everybody could weigh in with that hashtag. And I loved those conversations, fun, because they made me solidify my own beliefs in new ways. Because when you're having conversations like that, you're like, why is that a hill I'm willing to die on? Or why do I care so much about this? Or why do I not care at all about that? So it made you articulate in new ways, I felt like. And it also helped you to think through other people's perspectives, because they're in a different school, a different circumstance, a different country sometimes. And so it was really amazing way just to push thinking, to have like pretty rich conversation given the format that we were, 140 characters at a time. And you felt like this, I don't know, there was just this magic that was happening with educators all over the world, putting intention into those moments of time where we're collectively thinking about a problem.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing too is we'd have people, as you mentioned, not only from just different states and different countries, but also different types of schools, different populations of kids. And that was really great for that diversity of thought, because what might have seemed like a huge need for me in a suburban school district was not the same reality for somebody who was teaching in rural Alabama. And to be able, we still have, the same Department of Education governing what we were doing, and yet the needs were so vastly different. So we would think through, yes, this might work great for a school of 1,000 kids in one place, but this school only has 60, and that's, K through 12, right?
Yeah.
So we kept really talking through, how can we meet the needs of the kids who are in front of us? But also kind of debate our positions and, should this be an important thing that we consider? Or is it okay that states differ or countries differ, or however we were looking at it?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed being able to think through that. And I wasn't always I remember being pretty firm in a lot of my positions, and then stopping and going, that is very different. So it was a great way to realize how completely different. And this is going to sound like I'm like an idiot. So let me try to really compose my thoughts here. I am a highly empathetic person. I know that my way is not the highway or the right way, right? And yet, even as much as I thought that I knew other perspectives, I was really not well versed in how different some of those differences were. And I was so grateful to the people calling me in on some of those discussions.
That's the difference too, is it was called in.
Yeah.
It was less what you see now, I feel like, or how it's evolved, it's more attack than how many people lovingly asked more questions, you know?
And even if it wasn't so lovingly, there were some times when people were just like, snap out of it, girl. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. And of course I didn't. So it kind of got me into a place where I could have not only those conversations online, but then when I went to different conferences, mm-hmm. to have those and to sit and listen more, because I was like, okay, yeah, I have a perspective, but it maybe doesn't need to be the main perspective being discussed right now. And how I felt included, yet I didn't have to be the one always contributing.
Yep.
And that was a really cool thing. I also
loved the way that community showed up to conferences, because there was always this back channel of sharing and resource swapping and amplifying important messages. And like, there was so much richness in the back channel that was happening when we did get to those conferences that I felt like was pretty transformative.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of? So we're talking about adult learning communities and how we helped each other grow and had different opinions coming in, different perspectives coming in. So, back in the day, Victorian times, really a long time ago, the salon was how people would connect, and they might start off, with some form of music performance or whatever, but it was a lot of discussion. I mean, the entire formation of our country came from salon discussions. Now, there were a lot of perspectives that were left out, obviously, because it was mostly the wealthy landowners who had this opportunity. However, a lot of those gentlemen, say that with air quotes, were out having much more heated arguments. And their wives were the ones inviting in, and you'd have these really huge social occasions, right? But that was how women were able to get, let's specify, rich white women were able to get their voice heard. And a lot of times those were the conversations that helped shape the thought about, well, here's what we should do for our country. We could talk about how that was problematic because it was only one point of view, but that salon mentality, the idea of having a bunch of people come to a place and discuss ideas and debate with each other and listen and learn, that is a thing that I think humans crave, most humans. If you're a curious person and you like to, hear from other people, I think that salon mentality is what social media became early on.
I think early on, that was exactly what it was. And I think the shift that I have noticed is the shift that I notice in every platform, which is it starts out in that connecting, sharing, amplifying voices. It starts out that way, and then it gets overtaken by advertising and influencers and these other things that are not necessarily there for the same reason, right? And then pretty soon your feed is full of things that are kind of diverting away from the rich discussion. That's what mine started to look like. And so then you spend less time there because the richness isn't there anymore. And so I wonder, even when we look at schools and we talked about how a lot of professional development, these communities might be formed, but the communities are kind of forced. The topics are forced. And so it doesn't feel the same as those early days on Twitter or those conference moments, because it just is happening in a different way. There's nothing organic about the way that it's unfolding and how conversations are happening and who gets to weigh in and the different perspectives, like you're saying. And suddenly, you're back in the echo chamber of your own school, and conversations devolve into everything but the thing that you started to focus on, because you're dealing with like real problems and kids. And so, I don't know, it looks different. I've never experienced that. I shouldn't say never. It's been rare that I've experienced that inside a school in those types of settings where it's a little more forced, of like a PLC type thing.
Yeah, professional learning communities really, as those started to evolve in the late 2000s, I would say 2008, 2009, 2010, the whole mentality was, again, it should be a small group of people deciding, here are the things that we need to look for, here are the things that we want to improve together, and then trying to solve some problems together. And it really became, in a lot of places, this is what the district wants you to do. And it was ordered. So again, that kind of organic discussion or even grassroots kind of thinking was pushed aside for, here's what the division or here's what the district wants you to do. And so it did not feel natural. It was like, now this is just another thing I have to do rather than something I get to do.
But when I think about how much time I spent talking with other educators on Twitter and in those ed chats and in those back channels, and even when I wasn't at the conference, I would get some of the richness from that conference because I was following people's back channels. And so I think about the amount of time was hours and hours and hours and days, right? Of just all this like richness coming at us. And that's really hard to do in a controlled setting because it's not the like stolen moments while you're cooking dinner and you're in an ed chat, right? It's you're having to find an hour in your day and focus on this one thing that may or may not be the thing that matters to you right now.
And you can pick and choose.
And you could pick and choose and you could decide, you could weigh in and decide what was important for your attention and the friendships like that grew out of that. I mean, as you said, like that's how we met.
Right.
I think cannot be overstated because so many of the people that you and I know and love around the world, we met because of Twitter or because of their blogs or both.
Yeah. And sometimes followed up with in person, you know, like you said before, at a conference. And like, it was great because, and especially for somebody like me, I'm super awkward when I first meet people. But if I already,
sorry, everyone.
Yeah. Many of you are like, yes, and you still are. No, it's that's Kyle Pace. I'm socially awkward, Kyle.
Yep.
We would joke about that, but we already had an in. It was like the conversation you didn't need an icebreaker.
It was already started.
Exactly. You're a lot taller than I thought. Josh Allen says to me, you're a lot shorter than I thought. That's how we talk. And then instantly we're into a conversation that is a continuation of one we've already had online. So it didn't feel like, you know, it was this brand new thing we had to start all over again. You just kept the conversations going.
Yeah.
And as you said before, it was a choice of, this ed chat is something that I'll keep an eye on, but I'm not really that invested. I don't have to participate in it. You could always go back, and if you missed it, you could always go back and read through it.
Yeah.
I just don't see those kind of things happening anymore. There's too much. It's like this fire hose now where everything comes at you.
And too many places, I feel like.
Yeah.
Am I on Instagram? Am I on Facebook Live? Am I on Twitter? No. Are we on Blue Sky? Like it feels so separated that you're not sure where to be. People aren't blogging in the same ways that they were. It went to Medium and then Substack. And now, you know, some of it's hidden behind Patreon. And so you're like, I don't know how it like grassroots in the way that we knew it then.
Right. I see some on LinkedIn, and it depends on who the person is that's posting and how they share. Mary Beth Hertz is awesome at that.
She is awesome at that.
And Gary Stager too.
I was just going to say Gary. Yeah.
But what I also notice happens on LinkedIn is some really great conversations happen. And then some ed techpreneur comes in and hijacks the conversation trying to sell something, or trying to like, you should use my services, or they're trying to justify the product that they sell. So they argue with you in a way that isn't constructive, or because they just want to sell you something. So I've seen that to the point where I don't like to be on LinkedIn for that very reason.
And the hard part about LinkedIn is you have to know that person already.
Yes. Yeah. You have to already be connected.
And so if you don't know them, I mean, I guess people add me that don't know me.
Sometimes people will
invitations and I don't know who this person is,
or they get reposted by somebody that you do know.
Yeah.
So there is that too. It's
just hard. It's not the same as Twitter, where you might stumble on someone or people are actively helping you grow your network. So I think that's maybe the difference.
Well, and as with Twitter and also with Blue Sky and maybe a few other places, if you're using the hashtags, you don't necessarily have to be following someone if you're doing the search on the hashtag. Yeah. It's just mind-boggling to me as I think back to like when I was in university, right? And I'm a music major at the time, music education major at the time. And my entire network of people was probably 20, 25 maybe.
Yep.
We had to physically be in the same space to have any conversations like this. So our university had places where we could congregate, where they actively recommended to us, you should come hang out here. And sometimes like you'd have like an organization for music educators, it's called MUFI, and they'd have meetings, and then you could have conversations like that as university students. Sometimes they'd bring in speakers, other teachers, other educators. But again, it was so small.
Yeah.
And how social media at its very, crux was trying to connect people. Mm-hmm. And the intention there.
And it did it well.
It did for a while.
Yes.
And as all things happen, evolution in thought, evolution in how people use a tool, even though we don't really necessarily like how those things evolve, it happens. So instead of like, okay, we don't have the Twitter ed chat that we used to have. So now, how do we help the people who are coming after us to experience that same richness, how can they make those connections to get their own learning needs met? Yeah. Because as we know, as educators, if you can continue to get your multiple degrees, you can get a graduate degree, you can continue taking those classes, but that's a very, very small piece of learning because it's focused and it's a tiny little group. How do you experience the richness of global thought versus your local?
I feel so lucky that we got the coffee house moment of Twitter because I don't know that I would be as good at connecting people and seeing the world that way, right, if I had not had Twitter. And so that was an experience that then when I was interacting professionally with folks outside of education and they would say, oh, let me introduce you, let me make an email introduction or let me introduce you. I knew what to do with that, which I don't know that I really would have known how to utilize that as a skill prior to Twitter because it's not something that's really taught well in schools. It's not something you experience in schools because in schools it's like, you have cliques and you have these people, it's like, we want to protect this thing we're doing. And so we're going to give it a name and a club and everybody else, or you're going to have to rush to be a part of this, or you're going to have to whatever. And so that makes it really tricky because then you leave school and the strength is actually in these places where there's diversity of thought, where there's a lot of different people coming together, where there's different perspectives and voices and people you wouldn't necessarily see in everyday life. I mean, I think about the coffee houses of like the 20s and how many authors and artists and like all these people coming together, this diversity of thought happening that really led to so much richness in the world that wouldn't have happened without that moment in time where all these people were coming together. And that really felt like what Twitter was doing in the early days is not only giving us space to do that, but also teaching me what does it look like to have a connected, collaborative group of people moving together. And it wasn't necessarily that we all had the same goals or agendas, right? We were all still living our own lives, but there was this overlap where you started to see what I'm doing here has implications for what's happening over there, or what I'm doing here could have implications for what's happening over there because I see things a little bit differently. And now I can push in and help. And you and I both made a lot of connections in that, in those early days that led to other things like starting a school.
Right.
Like, Nick and I did the Project PLN where we kind of gathered everybody's voices to try and publish voices that maybe weren't heard as much because they didn't have their own blogs and their own following yet. So we kind of collected that. The Reform Symposium conference, right, came out of an ed chat. There were so many of these other things that was like, oh, you're interested in that too? Like, let's try something together. And very much that like startup Silicon Valley kind of feel to that community that I have not experienced, like I said, since then in the same way that it was happening in the early days of, but I think you're right. It was like the overlap of Twitter, conferences, and blogging.
I wonder, like, I know that there are some groups that have done smaller, more salon-like kind of conversations. I've brought up the Shrug Con before at the University of Windsor. And I wonder if some of those are taking those places. I mean, filling some of the spaces because they're open to anyone who's an educator and is interested in having those conversations. Maybe it's just again, that's available to people who know about it. How did I know about
it? That's the tricky part, right?
I was already connected to the people who are running it.
And I feel like what I come across more often than not is when there are those spaces, they now are behind a paywall.
Yeah.
And that makes it really difficult. What was nice about Twitter, because there was no paywall at the time, we were all kind of invited into the conversations, invited into the collaboration, and all it took was your attention, right? It didn't take knowing the right person. It was just, you could just show up.
Well, and again, I think that we've talked about ed camps before. Ed camps, the teach meets, all of those really kind of also played a huge role.
Lovely. Yep.
And
for the same reason, I would agree.
Yeah. I know that the number of ed camps has dwindled over the last, decade. And I'm wondering too, is that because social media went and branched off into different ways? Did people decide that, ed camp is a pretty big production. And you do need sponsors for giveaways and for food and whatever else, but it's still mostly people donating their time and getting like a school or an educational institution to donate space. None of that was actually that difficult to do, having organized one myself.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that it wasn't difficult. It was a lot of work, but it was something that, again, we just asked. And people said yes, right? And the ed camps that I've been a part of in Colorado, it's been the same thing. The people who organized it mostly just asked, and people will gladly say yes. So maybe, Kelly, what I'm thinking is we might need to just push people around us to have more of these options, whether it's an in-person thing like an ed camp, or if we do something that's like the Reform Symposium, or like what Dave Cormier is doing with ShrugCon. Yeah. It's all free.
And all free. Yeah. I do think there's something to it being free. I got to be a part of a really interesting group here in Colorado that was started by the folks who started Embark School, which is a micro school in Denver in the Highlands neighborhood. And they are a middle school that is run out of at the time was run out of a bike shop and a coffee shop. And so the learning is kind of embedded in those places. But the folks who started Embark started this iterative space. And what they wanted was just a space where you could come and as an educator be taken care of at a level that most of our corporate people in the US get to enjoy, that we as educators never get those moments. But you still had to apply for it. But what I loved is the application process was pretty open-ended in that it didn't ask you that you had to have a amazing idea that you were pitching. Those questions were on there of like, what are you interested? What are you working on? What do you hope to work on? But then there was no oversight actually in iterative space. So what would happen is you would show up for either a 3-week cohort or a 6-week. I showed up for the 3-week purely because I didn't know what to expect. And my life was such that I was like, this is over summer. These are the precious 2 days I get to not be focused on school. So I committed to the 3-week, and I really did it because I knew the founder of it. And I'm not sure I would have signed up for it otherwise, because a lot of those things end up being such a suck, right? They take more than they give. But what was interesting about iterative space is about 20 people would show up, all of us strangers, all from all over Colorado, even outside of Colorado. And we'd show up as a cohort. And the only requirement was it was in a house, this beautifully appointed space. The pantries were stocked with food for all of us based on what we told them we enjoy as snacks. The fridge was always stocked. There was always beer and wine. There was it was fully decked out, this house. There were sticky notes and notepads and pens and all kinds of things in every room that you had free access to. It was really just, this is your space, come and use it freely. What was interesting is they said, the only requirement is if you're in the house, we're going to serve you lunch every single day, a catered lunch, but eat it with the other residents here. And so it was this beautiful space where everyone was working on their own thing. But then once a day, you'd sit around a table and eat with other educators. And inevitably what happens is you talk about your project, you talk about education, you start to make connections. It was very much like the same feeling of the early days of Twitter, where it's like, oh, you're working on this? Do you know so-and-so? Well, let me make an introduction. And then there's this, this amplifying effect that they essentially were creating the salon or the coffee house. I still don't know how this happened and how this worked, but they also figured out how to pay us all to work on the thing we cared about. And so we made about $1,000 a week just for showing up. That is an unusual space.
Right.
But the connections that are still coming out of that time that I had at Iterative, what was it, 3 or 4 years now ago? And the people that I'm connected to is very reminiscent of what we experienced on Twitter in the early days.
Right. And it feels like, again, it's a paid retreat. And when I say retreat, the corporations that I've worked for in the past, when they've had retreats, it was about camaraderie and making sure you're bonding together as a company. And in some of them, there was also a goal that of some type of project that you would all kind of problem solve together. So if that's happening at a corporate level, how do we make those kind of instances happen for educators? Because again, there's not a lot of that freedom to, I think people who've never been in education don't realize how rigid school schedules are.
I would say probably not.
The first time
down to the seconds that you're counting that you have time to go to the bathroom.
Exactly. The first time I ever worked outside of education, the level of freedom, I was like, oh, wow, okay. I don't have to this is so bizarre to me, right? And it makes me wonder too, and I know that we've talked about this before, how when you have such restrictions on your time with the adults, you're also doing that to the children.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for most people to experience that there's that wonderful space in between no restraints whatsoever or constraints whatsoever and some freedom, but not very much. Both of those are limiting to creativity and to problem solving. It's in the middle where you have some constraints, but you also have some freedom of thought and time and ability to take care of your own human needs.
Yeah.
That how important that is for adults, but also how important that is for kids. So it's there. These two things can go hand in hand.
Yeah. And what I loved about Iterative, they talked about this idea of radical trust. We're going to give you radical trust. And they didn't really have any oversight. They didn't care if we finished our project that we said we were coming. In fact, all of us, I think, kind of our projects shifted or expanded or changed as we were interacting and doing these things, or might have scrapped it and gone a different direction altogether because something new opened up or a new path or a new way of thinking. But when I look at the residents that have been through Iterative and the rich projects and things that they are doing that came out of this time, and I'm like, gosh, and I think about how rich all of the things that the people we've met over the years, through Twitter and through these things, the ways that changed them and changed the trajectory of the things they were doing and the richness that came out of those communities. I'm like, we really do need that kind of a space to flourish.
Right. It's almost like projects, thoughts, get hijacked by accountability. And I say that because it's not that I think that we should have an accountability-free world, but when accountability becomes the biggest constraint,
yes,
It limits what you're able to do. Again, I just think about how much more our students were able to learn when they were on a project and they were really excited about it. And I didn't have to tell them, sorry, you have to finish it now because we need to go to the next unit, right? They could keep going. And some of the ideas that those kids came up with, you're just like, wow. Yeah. Astounded as a teacher, right?
Astounded. Yep.
But I think, again, most kids, if they have the opportunity where they get the time that they need, and this is not going the way I thought it should go, I really need to change and move this direction. That is a really huge skill to learn rather than keep doing the same thing over and over again with bad results because that's what you started with and you better finish that.
Yeah.
Versus this is not working.
And it's interesting looking back how much of our experience in that Twitter community of educators really did end up translating in a physical way at Anastasis.
For sure. And it made me really happy because a lot of the things that I was like, okay, as an educator here, philosophically, this is what I truly believe about learning and about kids and even as adults. And the fact that we were able to take those things out of just the philosophical realm and make them happen in the classroom, that was, I remember talking to some of my former coworkers, after I started at Anastasis, and I was telling them all of the things that they were doing. And my friend Sharon Commissar Langdon said, Michelle, you're doing now what we all thought we were doing, or we were getting into when we decided to become educators. And she goes, you're actually getting to do what we wanted to do or what we thought it was going to look like. And I remember sitting back going, oh, she's right. Like she is spot on because these are the things that I'm like, if we all got to do what we wanted to do as a teacher, and that is to really help kids grow as learners, we would not be forcing them to sit in rows and go through a textbook or a workbook or worksheets all day long because we know that's not really learning. That's about the accountability piece.
Yeah.
And we spend all of our time on the accountability piece and none of those time, I shouldn't say none, very little slivers of time.
A smaller amount, yeah.
Yeah, on actually the learning and creative process of learning. So I remember thinking that, again, we talked about this.
The PLC movement was all about accountability. Yeah.
Yes.
Prove it, prove it, prove it.
I get the people who are like that, but it makes me sad for them because I'm like, you don't trust anybody to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And if you really...
It also is just not true to our nature as people that of how we communicate and collaborate and how ideas happen. It's not true to the nature of how ideas unfold and grow and shift and like move, right? Because it's so confined in this is what it's going to look like. And it's so obsessed with the end product and the outcome that there's no opportunity for real innovation, for real movement, for anything new to be born. Like it's so static.
Right. And I know we've said this before in many episodes, but when you trust people to do the right thing without, micromanaging that process all the way along, absolutely you'll get the people who take advantage of it. But that is such a small, small, small percentage.
It is.
Everybody else is going to blow you away with what they're able to come up with because of that freedom and trust.
And the reality, I'm thinking in terms of iterative space, the number of people who didn't show up every day, who maybe showed up one or two times, you could say in quotes, they were taking advantage of that, right? They were getting paid. They weren't showing up. They weren't using the program the way it was intended, whatever. They're the ones who missed out on that experience.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, that might happen, but we can't be so obsessed with the people who are missing out on the richness that we get rid of the richness altogether because we can't allow for it to be what it is.
And that's like, if you truly want life-changing or innovative thought, innovative projects, you can't lock it down because you're going to get the same thing that's always been, because when people are not allowed to have that freedom and that trust to explore, they're going to go back to what they know.
Yeah.
And we've seen that over and over and over again.
And it makes sense why we keep going, well, education is not changing. It's not evolving. And it's like, well, because we've created so many accountability systems. We've created so many outcome-based. We're so obsessed with outcomes, right? That there is no way that organic process can happen because there's too many time structures. There's too many accountability measures that are too narrowly focused. There's all of these things kind of hindering. So it's like, well, no wonder that nothing's changing. You look at, I'm reading a book right now called Startup Communities by Brad Feld, and he's writing about the startup community movement in Boulder here in Colorado that was very much like what happened in Silicon Valley. And so he's kind of walking through like what were the enabling conditions that made that possible. And so much of what he's saying, I'm like, well, this is exactly what happens in these spaces that we've been a part of. It's the same sort of movements, right? He's like, you need a certain density of people that are all willing to think differently and do these different things. And they're all working on their own projects, but willing to help others, like this collaborative spirit. It's the incidental bump-ins and the overlaps and the connections that people are making. Well, that's what we experienced certainly on Twitter, right, and also at Iterative Space and some of these other things that I've been a part of. It really was this startup community. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we intentionally create the conditions for that startup community mentality within education? And I'm just like obsessed with this idea right now of how do we create space for that? Because I think that's the only way it actually has any chance of changing.
It's the yes and concept, right? So improvisation, if you're doing that in theater or in comedy, anything somebody gives to you, you say yes, and then you do and. Dean Sharesky and I led a session at a conference, an education conference in Canada one time, and it was how to change the yeah, but to a yes and, and I'm very good at yeah, but I can think of all of the obstacles all the time.
You are good at it.
And it reminds me
you're also good at yes and.
It's my nature is to do the yeah, but, and I've had to really force myself to push to the yes and. So how can we look at a situation and think through, here are the constraints that we've previously been under. If we could change all of those, how can we change those from a yeah, but to a yes and? That session was really great because we had a lot of teachers up in Canada. I think we were up in Calgary at the time. And they were really thinking through, and what was interesting is shortly after that, a lot of their laws were changing too, and their federal laws to go more towards competency-based education instead of the standards that we have. They were just very different. I'm not saying that those people in that room were the ones who changed the laws, because I don't know that. But I do know the thought around how they were all thinking about education, where it needed to go. Action happened. So it wasn't just, that small group of people. It was getting other people alongside them and listening to each other and learning from each other. That's what, a really good learning community can do for you, is to help you think things through and then turn it into action.
Yeah. I wonder how we be more intentional about creating space for those learning communities to exist. And I'm also curious how we talked about stakeholders, because this is part of my thinking in the recent future, in the recent present, this is my thinking. But I wonder, in education, there's so many stakeholders, but the stakeholders talking about education are usually just teachers and parents. And every once in a while, you'll get, technology companies weighing in, but that's more for, how much money can I make? Or you'll get, curriculum companies pushing in, but that's pretty rare as far as like creating the conditions for those conversations to have. So the stakeholders that end up talking about these interesting problems that we're solving in education end up being really educators, sometimes parents, and usually it's only if their child is having a less than stellar experience. And so my question is, how do we, because we really are all stakeholders in having an educated society, it goes better for literally all of us if the education is better. And so I wonder how we make schools more central in communities. How do we bring in those additional community voices so that they can hear what's happening in schools and how educators are thinking about the problems that they're facing in schools? And two, because we do exist within this community that's got a lot of different ideas and voices and perspectives, how do we be more intentional about what overlaps can happen so that we can take advantage of all of those voices and different experiences. I'm just really curious about how do we create the larger salons, right? Where it's more, you've got more of the voices in the room than just, one demographic that ends up being more of an echo chamber.
You want to know what's funny about the whole time you're talking about that, my 30 plus years in education flashed through my brain. And I'm like, the number of times that we've done research across our nation and asked businesses, what do you need?
Yeah.
What kind of skills? And I know that Carl Fish and Scott McLeod did this also when Web 2.0 was a thing, and they actually shared that information with schools saying, here's what we're hearing from corporations, from other fields, saying they don't want kids coming in with perfect, 5-paragraph essays, whatever. They need people who know how to problem solve. Mm-hmm. They need people who know how to work together as a team. And all of these listed of things that they had, like rated exactly by the number of businesses they had. Yeah. And yet our standards in most, again, they vary from state to state, but on a national level, we haven't seen as much shift. And that's funny because that's what they called it, right?
Shift happens. Yeah.
Shift happens. We haven't really seen a huge shift in how kids are educated. And again, I'm speaking very generally. There are a lot of schools who are doing this really well. They're incorporating all of those things into how they do school on a regular basis, how they meet with kids, how they challenge kids. But overall, nationally, we haven't moved a whole lot. And that was 2008 or 9 when Shift Happens came out?
Yeah, it was early. 2008, I think, was the first one.
And I was working with administrators one day and I shared that with them. And we had a conversation and I said, how do you see this changing how your school looks, the things that you're doing day to day? And they're like, well, we really can't because we're tied by the standards that our district requires, the state requires, the federal requires.
The problem with that as a narrative is not realizing that even if you started with what businesses are saying, this is what we need, all of the other things can be embedded within that, which is what we found with what we did at Anastasis. So the shutting down of the conversations that happen so immediately, the buts, is, I think, not doing any of us any good.
Right.
Which again is why I think we need more voices in the room to be able to have these conversations, to hear the overlaps in ideas. Like we need the artists, we need the business owner, we need the entrepreneurs, we need a wide variety, we need the mental health professionals. Like we need all these people in the room hearing things.
Including the educators who are already doing it, especially the educators who are doing it within a system that has a whole lot more constraints than we did.
Yes. Yeah. So I've been playing with this idea. So last week, and unfortunately you were not feeling well, so you couldn't attend, but we held this event called The Adjacent Possible based on Stephen Johnson's idea of the adjacent possible, of when you are in these situations where you're bumping into other people, all these adjacent possibilities open up. So I may not know the right person to talk to, but suddenly when I'm in this room, all these other possibilities open up that now I have other ideas and ways that might be possible. And it was based on an experience I had in Boulder, actually, in the startup community in 2010, which was the House of Genius. And the House of Genius was started by Toma Bedoya. It's international now. They're kind of everywhere. They are no longer in Boulder, but essentially what would happen is an entrepreneur would come in to a space, and it was a house, it was a living room, and you had 2 minutes to pitch your idea to a group of strangers who you don't know who's in the room. The only rules were you don't get to know anyone's last names, and you don't get to know what anyone does for a living. And the intent behind that was, how do we make it equitable so that you're not giving any one person's voice too much weight because of the thing they do, because we tend to do that. And so by not knowing who's in the room, you don't know if you're talking to the VC that could fund it or a college student or, whoever. And so really interesting experience. The 2 minutes that you pitch has to be quick. It truly is an elevator pitch. And then everybody gives a round of feedback or asks questions or makes connections that it made them think of. The entrepreneur who's pitching doesn't get to respond to any of that in real time. And so then it comes back to the entrepreneur. They have 2 minutes to respond to the room. And then the attendees all respond to that or skip. So all in all, it's maybe 10 minutes long that you have this experience. Somebody's kind of taking notes in the background. At the end, you get to know who everybody in the room is. And I'm still getting connections from the people that I met in that room all these years later. Right. And it has stayed with me, even though the thing I pitched is still like a dream. It's still, that experience has stayed with me and the people that I've met along the way through those networking connections. And it was purely just having the opportunity for us to all think about something collectively. And so we did this Adjacent Possible, and Kyle Gamba and I and Shayna Belton pitched this idea that we have to a room of some strangers, some not strangers, because we're the ones who invited them in for this first one. But the idea being, what would happen if we got a group of people to hear this idea we have and then get a lot of different voices? And we had the same rules of like, don't share what you do until the end, and let's just see what happens. So I'm curious to see kind of how that grows and how that evolves and what comes of it. It's already been interesting, the kind of overlaps that are starting to like glimmer out of that. And I don't know, I'm just like, what other opportunities are out there? How else are people thinking about this? Or please steal this idea and use it in your own community and just see what happens. Because I have a hunch that if educators can be in rooms with a more diverse community and they can be sharing their problems of practice to a community and then just get a lot of different ideas, that things are going to change more rapidly and with more community connection than they might if we continue doing the same things we are currently doing.
Right. I think we're going to need a lot of problem solving in the near future. I don't know what's going to happen with education, with the current administration. And I think that's a scary place for a lot of educators and families to be.
Yeah.
We may be taking things into our own hands at some point to say, how can we still provide a free and appropriate education for all kids?
For all kids.
All kids. And ensure that it's not just, some people who are making decisions, and how can we make it equitable for all, but then also have like really real problems that our current system doesn't necessarily address. So I think that that's going to be something that educators may have to just take the banner of we're going to keep this going, and here's how we make it work for your kids. I don't know.
I do think that it is going to evolve as more grassroots.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be top down in the same way that it has been top down. I think it'll have to be grassroots in some ways, of just how do we work together with more intention and more fidelity and think through these big issues that really impact all of us, whether or not we have kids in the system, whether or not we think it matters. We all rely on an educated population. And so how do we ensure that that's happening in the best way that it can? And creating spaces where these hunches and ideas can collide, where people can be problem solving together, voices can be heard that may not normally be heard. I'm thinking of all of those pieces. And then two, there is a funding issue. So how do we get the people who have money in the room to really understand what is going on, who have the ability to impact that with funds?
I was just about to say, might we help people in our larger community when resources are not being shared equitably? And that's already the case, and it could potentially be a whole lot worse. So how do we as educators in a community help to make sure that distribution is more along the lines of where we're all hoping it would go? And that, again, may be, like you said, a grassroots issue that we have to be the ones, not you and I mean, as a community, to work together.
I was going to say, that's a lot of pressure.
No, I'm happy to be part of the solution. I know that I'm not the only voice, and we need to ensure that we've got people at the table to help with
and
those
I
discussions.
think what you started at the beginning saying with one of the brilliant things about Twitter is it forced you to get out of your silos of thought, because suddenly there were people who were pushing your thinking or giving you a peek into what that reality looks like for other kids or other communities or other whatever, right? When you're talking with somebody that is running a school that is a tribe school, it looks very different than the white suburban school that I was in, right? So when you're able to better have those moments where those voices are represented, are heard, well, suddenly we can work together differently because we understand the nuance of the problem differently, rather than assuming our view is the view or our story is the story.
Right. I think that the funding, as you said before, is going to be a huge piece of that. However, there are ways that we can work around, like we said before, there are a lot of ways that we can do things that doesn't cost an arm and a leg or anything for participants.
I was going to say the ed camps that we said, the ed chats on Twitter that are now on Blue Sky are obviously free. The Adjacent Possible event that we did was free. I mean, we provided food for people, but that was up to us, right? We didn't have to do that. We just did. All of these things that we talked about, House of Genius was free for me. Iterative Space was free. I think that it's not hard to look at how, I shouldn't say that. Iterative Space was free for me. It was not free for the people who were putting it on.
Right.
A caveat. But I think that an iterative space could exist where we just have space to exist together, right? I don't think all the things that were happening there necessarily needed to be in place. It was nice to have the fully stocked pantry and all the things, but I don't know that wasn't what made it magic, right? What made it magic was the people showing up, doing their work and doing it in the same space. Showing up to a coffee house, right, is relatively free. So there used to be more of those meetups that would happen in different places. And I remember doing meetups at coffee places. I remember doing meetups at the Rio with some margaritas. I remember meetups kind of all over the city, and it seemed more prevalent. And I don't know if I've just fallen more out of that world of being aware of where those things are happening, or if it's shifted and they're not quite happening the way that they did. But I think you're right. Like, how do we create that space that we all experienced and got the privilege of knowing what it's like to be part of that kind of a community and to collaborate in that way for the next generation?
I think we
with the next generation.
We were able to do that to a degree with our Phi Sigma conference at Anastasis, bringing in people from, and it wasn't just, Colorado educators. We had people coming that would fly in from other states and experience the lovely winter of lots of snow in February.
Yes.
In Colorado.
We had a few of them that were a little dicey.
Yeah. But again, it was come and talk, come and think through things, make choices here. You move with think with your feet, vote with your feet. And those, again, they're smaller pockets, they're smaller groups of people. But anybody who's listening to this, you can make some of those things happen in your community. Again, going to businesses and asking for donations of space or refreshments or whatever it might be. Again, a lot of them will tell you yes. The worst they can tell you is no. Those kind of things. You can look at things from a cost standpoint that you shouldn't need to have to charge a whole lot for your conference if you are able to get a lot of those things donated. So I think that it's possible for maybe this idea to pick up again with ed camps or something similar. People can call them whatever they want. But I do think it's going to be necessary in order to help keep education moving forward, and our kids are going to have a lot of different needs now. Everything post-COVID is, I think, and to me, honestly, that's when I stopped going to conferences.
Yeah.
I do think it's a lot different. So one of the things that I've noticed people talk about on Blue Sky during EdChat is that not all conferences make it safe for people with autoimmune diseases to attend.
You and I.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So if they have a masking policy, and as the avian virus picks up, those kind of things are going to be important again. So if you're going to host something that's in person, are you ensuring that there is someone who can assure people that their health needs are going to be met? Are you looking at maybe having sign language interpreters? Are you providing for people of all walks to be able to attend and feel safe in attending?
Yeah.
So all of those things now, how people will view a conference or an in-person meeting is different. If you're doing something online, like I was, referring to ShrugCon earlier, that was just sign up. And if you don't know if those things exist, well, if you're listening to this podcast,
now
you are connected to people who know lots of other people. Leverage your connections. That's another way to really think about your learning community is maybe you don't know what's out there, but you know people who are very connected. Use that. I've never had a problem if someone's called me or emailed me or whatever, said, hey, do you know so-and-so? Can you get us connected? Done it many, many times.
Right.
There are ways to leverage your network.
And nobody's offended when you say, do you know anyone that you could connect me with?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's what kind of was the beauty of that early education network was that was just what we did. Yeah. You need this. I know exactly. Oh, you want to learn about math in Calgary, Canada? I know exactly who you should talk to.
I know a person. Yeah. You need an author from,
Right.
It really was a lot of that. It makes me wonder what it would look like to do kind of an online version of House of Genius Adjacent Possible idea, like of just whoever in the community shows up. I don't know how you advertise that, but whoever in the community shows up and it's a different educator pitching each time and could be kind of a neat, I don't know. I mean, that's essentially what Twitter was, is it wasn't just educators, right? You'd get all walks of life weighing in because they'd see it come through or they'd see somebody's retweet and suddenly you've got, somebody completely unexpected reading the thing that you didn't think anybody cared about.
Well, and even the way that it allowed us to connect with people that our kids could learn from. So like I followed Philippe Cousteau on Twitter and one day he was like, oh yeah, I do these Skype calls with kids. So we Skyped with Philippe Cousteau. I mean,
so cool. We shared a project on I Learned Technology. I shared a project that the kids did after reading How We Got to Now by Steven Johnson. Steven Johnson's team picked it up and he wrote us the most lovely, weighed in on that project that the kids did. And it was really cool. Just the connections that could come out of, it wasn't necessarily that we thought that was how that was going to go. It was just, we were sharing and I don't know, it was neat.
That is probably the part that I think I miss the most about having it all in one place because my kids were connected to Philippe Cousteau and Sylvia Earle when they were learning about the ocean.
Kelly.
I mean, having conversations, not necessarily in real time, but getting to connect with them, with LeVar Burton, with hosts of authors, with Mrs. P and her story time, right?
Mrs. P.
Or even if it wasn't somebody famous, if it was just, someone else bringing one of my classes, they wanted to do some exploration about what it meant to be first generation. So children of immigrants. And so we talked to different people in Canada and in the United States about their experiences. And that gave, my kids, who most of them, they were 4th, 5th, 6th generation, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to hear their point of view. Learning from people outside of your bubble, that translates really well for kids because they always get excited about that. I think adults forget that they can do that too. And that's the beauty of having that learning community that does kind of expand out beyond just your local bubble.
Yeah. I miss that. I think the saddest part for me is when those networks get taken over by corporations. It becomes about making money in advertising because it shifts the way the conversations happen. It shifts what you see. And then the second being, when people become influencers and now you're seeing a very curated, perfect version of things, or their voice is so loud that you're not hearing from others anymore. And that's the part that's been hard, even on Pinterest, that was hard, where you could kind of organically decide who to follow and where you were going to see things and how it was going to look. And then suddenly it's like, oh, every other thing is an ad, and every other, it's like, I'm now just curating things that aren't necessarily anything I care about. Instagram and Twitter being the same, they like changed so much when that became a part of the model.
When the algorithm is such that it shows you what it thinks you need to see,
yes,
and again, I keep relating that back to education. We've decided 100% this is what kids need to learn without any of their input, right? So when the algorithm is making the decision for what you're being shown, it's not personal anymore. So that the learning communities were curated by each of us individually. And even though you and I followed a lot of the same people, thousands of the same people,
we had a lot that were totally different as well.
And how that really helps the conversations and the learning and the curiosity that's driven, that is all taken away when you are being shown something because there's an algorithm there instead. Yeah. And I really that's one of the things, again, I feel like we're doing advertising for Blue Sky, but I really like that it is literally chronological order. That's exactly.
I haven't found, yes. And I have enjoyed my time on Blue Sky. I haven't found the same magic yet through Blue Sky. And I think it's because I followed so many of the people whose voices I cared about for so long. And now it's like, where are those voices? And so I haven't found it to be useful for me in the same way yet. I also have been staying away just for my own health of what news I can handle right now, being all the time. And so that makes it hard too, because I feel like in the early days of Twitter, there wasn't a lot of that. There wasn't a lot of like current event talk, or I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah. I will also say, I think I probably spent, looking back with hindsight, an unhealthy amount of time in my chair or on my phone reading through. And now if I was like thinking about life balance, I maybe spent more time on that than is probably what I would prefer to do now, especially I had kids and things happening all the time, and everything was very busy anyway. Yes. With that said, I knew that even if I missed something, like there was a lot of FOMO, right? I can't miss this because somebody's going to say something really good.
FOMO.
But I also knew that I could put things away and go back and do it like a hashtag search and find things.
Yes.
I can still do that now. And as you said, I'm trying for my own well-being to stay off social media. I do think that, again, the time was very different. That 2008-ish forward, about 2015,
2007.
Things were just very different. And now if we look at the political landscape, or just how people interact with each other.
That's what I was going to say. I don't feel like it was such an angry place either.
No,
became angry, but
there were definitely individuals, yes. But as a whole, I didn't feel like if I said something that I was going to get, pounced on immediately or blindsided with things that had nothing to do with what we were discussing. Yeah. And now that kind of does happen, where your conversations get hijacked quite often. And I don't think that is any one platform. I think that is more
it's like a shift in consciousness or a shift in culture or something.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, because I miss it feeling like a safe space to say things. Even when you got pushback, it wasn't troll pushback. It was like,
it's the trolls. Again, I'm not talking about people who disagree with me or who get angry about something that I might stupidly post. It is the trolls, the people that are just there to cause problems and have a little flame war or something like that. Mm-hmm. I actually welcome pushback, and sometimes even if it's not, polite. I'm not all about the polite thing. I don't need people to be super sweet to me all the time before I can recognize something that I've said that was not right. However, if it's just a troll I have very much operated under the don't feed the trolls.
Yes.
Right. Also, it's kind of like, don't read the comments on public sections because you're just going to get upset. Because sometimes people are just that anonymity behind the keyboard. And it's interesting how, again, that that kind of made it
changed.
It did. It really, really did. We sound
because I feel like it used to be more of a giving community of everybody looking for what can I give, what can I offer, and that seems to have shifted to who can I embarrass?
Yeah. Yeah. Or how can I go viral quickly and make it?
Yeah.
That whole mentality is very mind-boggling to me, but it's sad because that's what a lot of our students have grown up with. And helping them to see that just because somebody goes viral doesn't mean that you're learning something from them. And sometimes people and posts go viral for like, it's not predictable, right? And it could be something that's good for humanity. It could be something that's awful for humanity. Yeah. I wish, again, we know that history has its cycles and we're backsliding into a cycle that not all of us necessarily are ready for or even want to admit that it's happening. But all of that to say, how we use a learning community, how we take our curiosity, we work together in whatever community we call that. But the action that comes out of that is what I'm interested in.
Yep.
I love having philosophical discussions. I love talking about things that I'm learning or that I want to learn. But I also now feel more obligated to have action behind it.
I would say that's true for me as well. I also feel like that was an outcome of those ed chats is there were people that would come into the ed chat and say, it's all great that you have all this theory, right? But what are you doing with it? And it really was that kind of, yeah, great. You're having a conversation. How is it changing anything?
Yes.
That led to the Reform Symposium conference, that led to us feeling like we should do anastasis, that led to all these other things. It was like, well, yeah, we're empowered. And so why aren't we doing something with it? And and it's great. The conversations are great. They're important. They get us to the place where we've clarified our thinking enough that we can take action. But I do think that action is an important piece.
Right. It's, again, I spent much of my life being very risk averse. And then looking at it now, like the more I talk about things and only talk about things, the more frustrated I become. This is, for me personally. And I know that even like a small thing, whether it's a phone call or talking with somebody else and making a plan, that's when I feel like, okay, I can make a difference. And I can, I don't want to be that person that just complains and whines about the status quo. I've been there. I've done that a lot.
But sometimes truly it is the blog post that somebody writes and then gets sent to you.
Yeah.
That action of writing the blog post might seem like I'm just talking about it in a different format. But I do find that even that action sometimes is enough because it's abundant. It opens up other opportunities. It gets shared with people. Other people read it and suddenly something else is happening. Like it is a catalyst for action, I guess. It's an action itself, but I find that can be an outside. It's why I'm like, well, we should do a podcast, not just to record what we've done, but also because we never know what these conversations, we have them anyway, but we never know what these conversations that other people now can listen into, how it might activate what they're doing or how they connect with us. And now we're doing something together.
Right.
So I do think that it's important to continue having the conversations, but yeah, what actions come out of it, what follows it.
Well, and
equally important.
We've said before that we realize that we've got people that are in different phases, right? And maybe that the conversation, just listening to a conversation is where they can start. That's all that they're ready for. And being able to recognize that people are in different stages of change in their own lives, regardless of what's going on, right? You're not always ready to be the one taking action, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why those learning communities are so valuable, because you can have people in the different stages. And it's very much like
that's
the stages
such a good point
that we talk about at Anastasis, right? I am just a novice here. I'm learning, I'm absorbing, I'm experimenting a little bit. We have to make space for people.
Well, and you think about the language people used on Twitter was I'm just a lurker right now.
Right.
And then you'd see them like dip their toe into having the conversations and engaging with a couple people. And then they got a little braver and would use a hashtag. And yeah, it was really cool.
And just respecting that I'm someone who's super impatient. I want change to happen. Like the second that the light bulb happens in my brain, I'm thinking, oh, yeah. And I forget that there were people, way before me that also had all of these ideas.
Yes.
And they may have been impatient for things to change, but that was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
You know what I keep thinking about is in education, we seem to be very good at deconstructing what's wrong with it. So we can point out all day long and kind of do this deconstruction process. And a lot of us did that in real time together on Twitter. We were all kind of in the same deconstruction together. We're shaking our fists and we're kind of getting angry. I think what we've not figured out how to do well in education is the reconstruction process of now that we see that what's wrong, how are we then going to respond to it and reconstruct what does it look like? And that's where I feel like we don't do it well. And part of that is the nature of deconstruction is that it can feel very lonely. We had a community that was kind of doing it in real time together through those ed chats and different things. But I think about in the school that I was in, that I was the lone wolf thinking that way, right? And so it was then suddenly I felt very isolated in, well, don't these people see what I see? And why don't they see what I see? And is there something wrong with me, right? The beauty of having that community is I knew I wasn't alone. And then we started to help each other in that reconstruction and redreaming what it could look like. I think without those communities, you just get stuck in that isolation of deconstruction. And then it's the like middle finger and you leave education altogether and go do something else. And we need those people because they're the very ones who are going to help take us to the next level. But without the adult learning communities where these collisions can happen, I don't know that we have a good way for the reconstruction to really take place.
Yeah, that, as you were saying all of that, it kind of brought me about to the comparisons constantly across countries, right? Mm-hmm. And the different reading scores or math scores and things that we compare. And then I keep trying to, especially in the United States, I'm like, do you realize not only how many people we have in the United States, but how vast this country is, and that when we say that we're going to, that every child, the Constitution is guaranteeing that every child has the ability to have a free and appropriate education. And what that actually means, not every country guarantees that, first of all. So their test scores will, of course, look different because they're not showing the test scores of every kid in their country. There's that piece of it. But also, as we say all of the time, we've got the kids in front of us and their needs, even if they come from the very same community, are different.
So vastly different. Yeah.
So now we're talking about this massive area that we call the United States. And I look around and say, okay, how can I ensure that the education these kids are getting is equitable, but also they're coming from very different environments. So that's where, resources are an issue. When you talk about deconstructing and reconstructing education, all of that has to play a part too. If we constantly look to Norway because they're so successful in their education, Norway's a very small country compared to us. Yes, I admire a lot of what they do and how they look to.
And there are practices we can bring to the United States that would be transformative. Right. Yeah. But it's not a one-to-one comparison.
No. And that's, again, it makes really salacious news to show, though, the United States is below. And it's not a contest, first of all. Why are we making our kids compete with people they'll never meet, may never meet? And secondly, how about we address the very real needs of our kids and what we know about child development and growth and brains and all of those things, rather than constantly saying, well, they're just failing.
Well, and I think the problem with the framing that way is it shuts down the conversation and makes it hopeless rather than the yes and, what do we do about that? Or how do we look at it differently? Or what do we borrow from that? Or what insight can we gain from that information? It's a conversation stopper. It doesn't open any new avenues for dialogue when that's the focus?
We talk about the word iteration, and we even have discussed iterative space. When we look at education in general in the United States, yes, it has changed. I mean, like, I know we see pictures from the early 1900s and compare it to pictures from now, and people say, oh, it's the same. That's not true. There are a lot of things that if I look at a classroom in today's time, that there are a lot of changes. However, are we truly iterating or are we just slightly improving or adding something new, but keeping a lot of the old practices that maybe aren't helpful for kids of 2025? So again, those kind of things can be discussed in learning communities, and then some action plans put together by those people. We just need to give educators and communities the time and space to think it out. And we can't have all these knee-jerk reactions to our kids are more stressed out, so we should take away their phones, or our kids are not reading as early, so let's start cramming reading down their throats more, because that is, again, a reaction and assuming that the practices of the past were actually better when that's not necessarily the case. It could be, but it's not necessarily the case.
I also want to just leave people with, don't feel like you have to wait for somebody to create this type of community. Like, we don't do disempowered. You're empowered to do it, just like I was empowered to invite a group of people to a home and pitch an idea, right? So I don't think we have to feel like, we have to wait for somebody to do this, and because we'll be in that holding pattern forever. But it's like, from the place you are, like, what could that look like? And it could look like joining Blue Sky and joining an Ed Chat once a week. What did you say? Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? Yes. On Blue Sky?
Yeah.
So it's an Ed Chat hashtag. So they will put out a question, and anybody who wants to can weigh in and discuss. And it's a great way to meet other really interesting humans.
Right.
So that's something that's an easy lift that we could all re-engage. But then I think, what is it in your community? Could you have a teach meet where you're just offering a place that, hey, I'm going to be at Starbucks at this location at this time, and would love to have whoever's, cares about this topic, come join us and let's have coffee and talk. Or what that could look like could be all over the place. I think you don't have to wait for somebody else to create that space.
I think that might be part of the key issue too. There are some people who are, again, not risk averse and who are happy just to say, forge ahead and be the one to initiate. There are some people, I'm not going to say that they're followers, but they don't necessarily like to lead, or they don't have the confidence to do that. So that's where I'm saying,
tell people, yes, I was the follower. It's because I've been part of these communities and brought into these communities that I feel empowered to do this now. If you had talked to me in 2007, I probably wasn't the one who felt empowered to do that. It was waiting to be invited in, or looking to the grownups who knew how this was supposed to look.
Well, guess what? Now we're the grown-ups.
But
I would say that
join us.
If you're someone who's listening and you don't feel empowered yet to start something on your own, reach out to us or to other people that you know and say, hey, I have an idea. I'm not really sure how to bring it to fruition, but I'd like to get some ideas. And just start bouncing ideas off of other people, or ask for connections. If you have a small network and you'd like it to grow, use that network to say, okay, you invite a friend and you invite a friend, and then that network's already growing.
I will say this adjacent possible is something I have been thinking about. I went back through emails following the House of Genius moment that I had. I sent Toma an email following that saying, have you ever thought of doing an education version? Because I think that could be really powerful. And we had this whole exchange. This idea has been percolating since 2010. And it took that long for it to happen. And it happened because I'm talking with other people that I've met through a network. Have you met this person? And ran across somebody here in town named Paul Kim doing incredible things in education. He's like, told him this idea I've had for the last 15 years. And he's like, okay, so when is it happening? And I was like, oh yeah, the action part. I was like, well, I have time now, so I guess it could happen now. And he's like, well, let's get a date on the calendar. So sometimes it does take those activators to help push it along. I don't want to make it sound like we just have all these ideas and then instantly act on them and
Right.
It's great. I mean, how long have we been talking about starting a podcast? It's a lot longer than this year. And so some of those I do think take a catalyst or an activator to come in and hear the idea and push it along. Even if that's the role you play, that's an important role,
right,
of being the encourager and somebody, because you need those people who believe in what you're saying enough to say, that'd be really cool. Let's try it.
right.
So, you know, even if you're not the person who has all the ideas or wants to be the quote unquote leader in that, we also need the people to say, I think you could do that.
Right.
And how many people along the way starting Anastasis that we met on Twitter were like, I think you could do that.
Right.
And I had no business believing them. And yet I needed those voices to say, yeah, it's worth.
In what you just said, I had no business. Obviously you did, because you had the ideas, but it's still that kind of, there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome. And I think that there are quite a few people that prevents them from being the one to start to be the actuator, but they have great ideas. So again, connecting with people, that's what it's so great to have. I know that we did strengths finders or something like that with students sometimes, but just knowing who is the one who feels brave enough to take the step forward, but you're all sharing ideas together. And when you feel very strongly about something, it isn't about whether it's a right or it's a wrong. It's not necessarily about, am I going to fail at this? Okay, if I do, then let me try something else. It's getting past those barriers we set for ourselves. And a lot of times that's easier to do when you have a community that isn't necessarily all like-minded, but have similar goals in mind.
Yes.
Right. So I feel like that's something that, again, if you're able to build yourself in some way, shape, or form, a learning community that fits your needs, these things are going to happen organically. As long as you put yourself out there enough to say, well, I'm not the person to do this piece, but my strengths lie. I'm really good at supporting.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. I had a thought that immediately went away as soon as you said that.
Sorry.
It'll probably come back to me. I just think this is what it was. We were all raised in an education system that told us where our place was, and that some people are leaders and some people are followers. And unless you're elected to be the leader so I think part of it is just the way that we were raised within a system that kind of was oriented a certain way and hierarchical in the way that it worked. And now we're seeing I'm seeing that those are false constraints, that's not really how it works. And so I think, getting out of that way of thinking is probably a first step. We keep maybe waiting for a permission slip that never comes. So this is your permission slip right now. We're giving it to you.
Do the thing, right?
You are empowered. Yeah.
And again, reach out if you're not sure where to start. We might not know where you should start either, but we might know somebody who
we
is
know
connected.
A lot of cool people. And so we can definitely at least introduce you to somebody smart.
I mean, do those people exist? Of course
more
they
connected.
Do. Of course they do.
More creative. I don't know. Yeah. I now I'm like, how do we start our own reconnected community, or I don't know, push better into those that are still existing.
Right.
Is a good place to start for us as well.
Agreed.
So we are resurrecting, I think, iterative space in a slightly different format. So when I have more information about that, I'll share what that looks like. And I think the hope is to activate those kind of all over the country and not just have it here in Colorado, but we found it to be really powerful. And so it's like, how do we share that and keep that good momentum going, even though the original iterative has closed? And so, what does that look like? And as that unfolds, I'll share here so that people can connect in and do that themselves. But I think that's all the words I have today.
Same.
Okay, good. Onward. Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.